Yeah, and how familiar are you with, since you brought it up, with Hinduism as an alternative framework to what you think of as traditional religion in the Abrahamic sense?
Somewhat to the, I mean, it's interesting. My own philosophical tradition, known as analytic philosophy, when it began in the early to mid 20th century, was very scientific, logical, dry. And yet, as time has gone on, I think maybe people have seen that that approach just doesn't have the resources to explain everything we need to explain. And there have emerged people defending a great variety of options. So, a great philosopher in Australia, Miri Al-Bahari, who defends a version of Advaita Vedanta,
Mhm.
the mystical Hindu tradition, or at least inspired by Advaita Vedanta, but defends it partly in these very dry, logically precise terms. So it's
Mhm.
absolutely fascinating. She argues that it's rational to trust the expert testimony of meditators who've spent 20 years in a cave or whatever.
Mhm.
So it's a wonderful. Again, I like mixing things up, marrying,
Yeah.
the cold, dry, logical, and she's not just doing that, to the mystical, the learning from meditation and mystical experience. So I am somewhat familiar, yeah, and it's an open question how much of these different traditions are really have the same core. Aldous Huxley, in the early 20th century, talked of the perennial philosophy, and he had this idea that really there's a mystical core to all of these religions, and then that mystical core is just expressed in different ways. I'm not sure how much I think that's right. Maybe there are real doctrinal differences between the different religions, but certainly I think there is mysticism in all of the different traditions, and to that extent, there is overlap and commonality. So we should see the difference as well as the similarity and the sameness.
Yeah, I think it's part of why maybe I'm more predisposed to see your worldview and philosophy as less incompatible, or I would go so far as to say entirely compatible with the existence of God, even in the traditional sense. I mean, part of the Hindu theology is the belief that there is one true God. Certainly, in the non-dualistic strand of Hinduism, there's one true God, but He resides in each of us and
Yeah.
resides in part and parcel across the universe, which I think is compatible with even the worldview of modern physics of the matter coming from the universe and returning back to the universe. And so I don't think that those you may have a problem of language there, describing one in religious terms and describing another in secular terms. But apart from that problem of language, I don't know that the underlying view is actually as different as we make it out to be. Although I could see why, maybe given your initial introduction to religion, it may have maybe presented itself as more of a tension between even your middle way and what you think of as God or traditional God-based religion. Someone maybe from the vantage point that I was introduced to what I think of as religion don't see that dichotomy so much between a belief in traditional God and your view of universal consciousness.
Yeah, it all depends, doesn't it, what we mean by God? And I mean, I had certain assumptions about my Catholic upbringing, but actually, when you dig into the views of Augustine and
Mhm. I was
Aquinas,
just going to bring up
you
Aquinas.
know,
Yep.
yeah, who were foundational in Catholic doctrine, it's very far actually from an anthropomorphic idea of God, the old man in the sky. Aquinas said, we can never talk straightforwardly about God. Even when we're saying God is all powerful, God isn't all powerful. God isn't powerful in the way a human being is powerful. God is radically distinct from anything in creation, and therefore we can only talk about God by analogy. So, really, for Aquinas, when we're saying God is powerful, or God is good, or God knows things, we mean God. There's something about God that is analogous to these qualities in human beings, but it's not quite the same. So sometimes I think, yeah, the new atheists like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris maybe had too simplistic an idea of what God is supposed to be. But yeah, I suppose I still come back to the problem of suffering for me. Insofar as we think God is in some sense all powerful, however we cash that out, insofar as we can understand that and good, it is hard to understand why the universe would be the way it is.
Yeah.
And so I'm led to, I mean, to my, as I see it, the universe is a cocktail of accident and design. You know, some things like the fine tuning in physics, other things to do with consciousness are sort of too improbably good to be fluke. But at
Mhm.
the same time, there is horrific, gratuitous suffering and masses of empty space. And I think we need to somehow reconcile both of these things. And that's really the project of my book, Why the Purpose of the Universe is. The atheists are getting something right. Traditional believers in God are getting something right, but they're both getting something wrong at the same time. And we need to somehow explain both of these things, which is a tall order, but